Hi, I will be talking on the impact of a contribution to Wagtail. Now, notice the to Wagtail part is in parentheses, and that's because in the world of open source, a lot of concepts generally spill over from organization to organization. And in as much as this presentation is going to revolve around the Wagtail CMS, a lot of the concepts here spill over to other open source organizations. So with that out of the way, let's get to introductions. I'm Chiemezo, but you can call me Mezo or Mezu, both of them work. I'm a web developer and very active open source contributor. And in 2024 and 2025, I was a Google Summer of Code contributor to the Wagtail CMS on an accessibility project in 2024, which was the creation of the image block, amongst other things, and the content security policy compatibility project, which was in 2025. Currently, I'm a session 5 Django node working on the Django debug toolbar, and as an icebreaker, I like cake. So, what is a contribution? Any action whatsoever that improves an open source project is a contribution. So, any way, any bit of effort that an individual or a group of individuals do to make an open source project is a contribution to that project in itself. Now, there are several types of contributions, only few of which are known. Now, mind you, this list is not exhaustive and it's not in any way in order of preference or importance. These are all valid ways to contribute. You could contribute by raising issues, by raising pull requests, by participating in discussions, by donating, translating, triaging issues, leaving reviews on pull requests, participating in polls, surveys, feedback forms, contributing to docs, being a part of the teams. For instance, Wagtail has had accessibility teams, has had UI teams. So being a part of that team is in itself a contribution. Helping other contributors is also another way to contribute. And contributions to community maintained packages are very valuable ways of contributing as well. I will explain more about each of these in the coming sessions of the slide. So, but this is just to put it out there on the types of contributions that we have. Now, the importance myth. There is this really common misconception that certain types of contributions aren't so helpful or needed and therefore best not done. That is a myth. It's actually very factually incorrect, and I'm here to show you just how incorrect that is. And what's worse is that these misconceptions often revolve around contributions that are not directly code related, or that may be some form of bug fixes, or that may be strictly opinion based. And those misconceptions can be very harmful to the lifespan of any open source project. But yes, this is a myth I wanted to dispel. Now, let's start with docs. And to start with docs, we need like a rough timeline of certain doc related things that have happened in the Wagtail CMS. So Wagtail first shipped in 2015, and when it shipped, there was some form of documentation in existence. Some around 2021, Sphinx got configured for Markdown support. Also later in 2021, Wagtail created its own Sphinx theme and that got added. So the thing with Sphinx is it allows you have your own custom themes that you can use on your project. So it's very flexible, and sometime around 2021, the Wagtail Sphinx theme was added. Now another feature or timeline based activity that happened in 2022 would be the documentation markdown parser got changed from Recommon Mark to MyST. Now these are just like to give you a backbone of the documentation stuff, the infrastructure, or like the skeleton that allowed for what later became the official Wagtail documentation. So this is what the Wagtail docs looked like sometime around 2015, 2016 in the earliest versions of Wagtail. And this is what it looks like now. Yes, it's definitely more than the change in the theme. There is so much more rich content. The documentation contains a lot more helpful content, and I assure you, this was not all done by the maintainers. It was done by contributors like you and I. So I ran a GitHub CLI script, actually a couple of scripts to get some data, and I found out that between the time of Wagtail's release till now, there have been at least 336 unique contributors to Wagtail on the topic label of documentation. So that means if you go to the Wagtail repository and you narrow it down to pull requests and you filter by the label documentation, if you bother to count, you'll count at least 336 unique contributors to Wagtail. Mind you, this is not including the Wagtail maintainers or the core team. So this is part of what made the huge difference between this and this. So now it's not just about the pull requests. Certain things have come up as discussion items that were brought to the notice of the maintainers and the core team on things that could be done better in the Wagtail documentation. And the Wagtail Sphinx theme itself, which has a separate repo, making it a community maintained package of Wagtail, has also had contributions to it. For the full list of contributions, you could for sure check out the repo. And of course, for every documentation, addition, or removal that was made, there are people that reviewed these. This goes to show that even a tiny dog fix can make so much of a difference in getting the documentation for an open source project from point A to point B. Now, here's a spotlight on something in the docs. Now, initially, in the Wagtail, the earlier Wagtail documentations, there was no tutorial. But after a couple of issues and discussions on how things could be made easier for new contributors, Wagtail decided to try to get that fixed. That led to a Google Season of Doc efforts in 2023, and this project was spearheaded by a contributor called Damilola, and the outcome was Wagtail having a dedicated tutorial section in its documentations. Now, this is one of the several cases of non-maintainers and just regular contributors like you and I playing a huge part in the success of an open source project. So up next, issues. Issues are a very good way of highlighting bugs, suggesting improvements, and setting up the basis for conversations. So let's face it, you're a contributor or you want to contribute to an open source organization. The first place you're most likely to go is the organization's repository. And you would most likely go through the issues there and try to find a fix for an issue, or try to filter by a label that resonates with you so that you could try to make a fix for that. Regardless of what route you go, chances are the issue section is where you would likely find yourself as a new contributor trying to get your hands dirty. They're a primary gateway through which contributors get a chance to contribute. Now, there is a common misconception that raising an issue is not as valid a contribution as raising a fix for an issue, which is not true. So here are some examples of some really loved features that have come into Wagtail and how they started out as issues from people in the community. Multilingual support for Wagtail as far back as 2014 was an issue that was raised by a contributor who eventually raised the fix for that. Stream field editing interface performance issues. So what happened was in 2016, there was an issue that a contributor raised about how the stream field interface lagged when there was a certain threshold that it encountered. Now that issue led to a rebuild of the Wagtail stream field and the inline panel UIs, which was something that also happened around the time of Wagtail's first hatch, which was a fundraising campaign of some sorts to get some features into Wagtail based off of the support that would come in during that campaign. Now, segregated multi-site support also came up as an issue by a contributor in 2018, the auto-collapsing stream-field blocks 2021, and the CSP compatibility issues, which I left for last because this is a particularly personal encounter with Wagtail, and I'll talk more on that. So, but all of these go to show that just even raising an issue of any sort is a valuable contribution to Wagtail, because sometimes the things that could come off the trying to look into an issue could be essential parts of a system or a redesign or some feature fix or functionality addition that would eventually come up to the CMS. Now, here's a spotlight on the issue, which is the CSP issue. The CSP issue is actually the project I worked on from my Google Summer of Code 2025. But as you can see, this issue was raised in 2015, which was 10 years ago. Now, this issue has been responsible for a lot of design changes and tweaks that have happened year in, year out in the Wagtail repository. Now, here is what that issue eventually bubbled up to. This is the project idea for the Google Summer of Code 2025 project that I worked on. So again, this is a classic case of an issue raised by a contributor becoming a feature that was added later on in Wagtail. The CSP compatibility is not fully completed yet, but it just needs a few more pushes and it will be there. So now, surveys and feedback forms. These are like the easiest ways to get feedback or comments from the wider community at large. And certain developments that have happened in the Wagtail CMS have come as a result, a direct result of the information retrieved from these surveys and feedback opportunities, from the headless surveys to the deployment surveys to even the Wagtail discussion page where active and ongoing discussions are happening about things that could be done better in Wagtail. And of course, let's not forget the RFC section. So RFC means request for comments. For open source organizations, before major changes are introduced, more often than not, the maintainers or the core teams or the administrators like to get community feedback. So they want a place or a platform for people to read about some of the stuff that members are proposing formally to the open source organization, get eyes on it, get critiques on it, and eventually decide on a way forward as to whether or not to embark on that particular feature. So RFCs are very essential, and they form what would be the backbone of a lot of open source projects. Now, here are some of the discussions that have shaped Wagtail one way or the other. So these two are actually related. One is a comment on the discussion topic, while the other is the discussion topic itself. So sometime in 2017, there were issues or there were complaints on the architectural depth of the UI in Wagtail. It led to a series of discussions that happened, and sometime around 2022, there was a comment on a lightweight front-end framework investigation. This was essentially what gave birth to Wagtail's usage of the Stimulus.js framework. Now, if you don't know Stimulus, I recommend you check it out. But if you do know the Stimulus.js framework and you've encountered the Wagtail source code, you would realize that the Stimulus framework is almost at the core of what a lot of things in the UI do. So that is a very classic case of a discussion leading to something that ended up being one of the most widely used parts of the Wagtail code base. And here is the RFC that came up as a result of the discussion for the conversation on the UI architectural depth. Now, translations. When Wagtail released, the only supported version of Wagtail at the time was the English language. But currently in 2025, as at the time of my reading this, or as at the time of my presenting this, Wagtail fully supports, or rather has very strong support for over 15 languages. Now, 15 languages is more than the number of languages that are in the core team or like that the maintainers know. So these extra languages definitely came from somewhere. It came from contributors, much like you and I. Now, how does Wagtail get translations from contributors? Well, Wagtail uses the Transifex tool, and Transifex integration was added in 2014. So, for at least 11 years, Wagtail has enabled contributors contribute to more languages in the Wagtail CMS. And while it might not seem like a big deal, while it might seem like, oh, just translating one word or one sentence or doing a typo fix, these things eventually bubble up because it's domino effect, and the reward is something that the whole community as a whole gets to reap. Now, this is a picture of some of the languages that Wagtail supports and their levels of support for these same languages. The fun part about this is that this is just, I think, a third of what is actually on the page. So there's ongoing efforts for a lot more languages than you can currently see here, and you could definitely be one of the contributors if you wanted to, which I do recommend you do if you can. So this again goes to show that the efforts of contributors all matter, because I mean, if not for somebody somewhere out there, Wagtail, who knows, may not have had a Catalan translation. So yes. Now, discussions. Discussions are also a very helpful addition. They're a very nice way to contribute. So, if you look at the slide, you would see that there are three discussion topics that are still, the links are there, while the other two are just the ticket numbers. Well, the other two are actually done. They started out as discussions and made it into features or improvements in Wagtail, like the support for RTL. RTL means right to left. So languages where the writing typically starts from the right and moves to the left. This was a feature that was really anticipated in Wagtail, and it allowed the support for some RTL languages. It did start out as a discussion. Some Wagtail admin dashboard enhancements started out as discussions. And right now, in the discussion section on Wagtail, we have topics on adding activity pub support, the Django MongoDB backend public preview, and some more discussions on the segregated multi-site support. And these are discussions that are open to everybody to contribute, because at this point in time, we've probably seen it in a number of instances where just one effort from a contributor, no matter how seemingly small, could start a domino effect and lead to something much larger than that contributor would have normally expected. So here is a spotlight on discussions. Now for Wagtail 7.0, one of the most talked about features was the introduction of the autosave functionality. Now it did start out as an intention to just have autosave. There were some underlying issues that were raised several years ago, and in 2021, the autosave issue, the official reference point for the autosave functionality, was created as a ticket. And this feature or this issue would 4 years down the line end up being one of the most anticipated and one of the best liked features of the Wagtail release. So this is yet another demonstration of where a contributor does something that they could not possibly imagine being a huge feature request, but just do it because, well, they're trying to contribute and make the CMS better. Now, pull requests. This is about it's the easiest. It doesn't need so much in terms of explanations. I mean, a pull request that gets merged into the Wagtail code base is a contribution. You've essentially contributed a piece of the Wagtail source code, and whoever uses Wagtail will, one way or the other, interface with something you've contributed a line of code to, and that is a completely valid contribution, which would always be appreciated. This is, I think, one of the most common ways for contributions to be done in the Wagtail project, and so far we've had over 860 unique people open at least one pull request, which has led to thousands of pull requests being generated. Donations, well, donations are essentially how some features get introduced into Wagtail. So when large organizations or small ones use or require particular features, they could donate and have the Wagtail team work on these features. These are some of the examples that have happened, like the page editor with Google or Wagtail localized with Mozilla, DIT and Twilio. Um, to check out more of these and to find out more of what these donations I've listed have been, you could head over to the wagtail.org sponsor page and definitely read up on that. But donations are a way of helping because let's face it, the bulk of open source work is volunteer work, and it's people giving you a piece of their time, their effort, their energy, and their knowledge to make something better. So a lot of times the donations you make go a long way in terms of support for both the maintainers of any project or people who are willing to contribute but would appreciate some monetization for the time they spend working on these features. So donations are definitely a welcome way to contribute to any organization. In fact, they are one of the most helpful ways. Up next, triage and reviews. So triages are really convenient for maintainers. I cannot state this enough. Sometimes it's particularly relieving when you are looking for what to contribute to or where you could put some effort in, and on the issue section you'd see labels that have carefully been arranged for you to look into. This is it's convenient. They're not as commonplace, but they are thoroughly appreciated. And triages serve as a confirmation of issues because if an issue can be triaged, it means it can be replicated. And if it can be replicated, it means a solution can very well be found for it, even if the solution may not be apparent. So, likewise, reviews, if there are pull requests that are up there, you could review, give your nuggets. There might be better ways you have, or cleaner, more efficient processes. The community needs you to help do these things because when you do them, to you, you might not feel like the person that put up the issue. You might not feel like the person that raised the pull request. You might not feel like the person that did the merge. But ultimately, you have a hand in just how efficient the code that was merged gets to be because when you review things, you help make the software a whole lot better in general. Now, this is yet again the Wagtail Stimulus RFC. Now, notice how there are 145 comments on the conversation. This, I think, is one of the most talked about RFCs, or rather, one of the most commented on RFCs. And all the comments, one way or the other, helped refine the approaches that were eventually used into making the Stimulus JS framework a possibility in the Wagtail code base. So every contribution counts, even if it's down to a comment on a request for comments. Now, helping contributors, and this is where I'm going to tell a little bit of a story. So I've been contributing to the Wagtail CMS project for roughly 2 years, and I won't lie, the reason I've been here this long is largely because I found help every step of the way. When I contributed to Wagtail the first time, I had not concluded it would be Wagtail. There were a couple of organizations I was trying to contribute to at the time, and I sent all of them messages. I introduced myself on their community channels. I was eager, willing to get started, willing to get my hands dirty on something. But it was in Wagtail where I got so much help. Like there were people who welcomed me, who gave me tips on what to look out for, who helped me find issues that were beginner friendly. And I dare say that those people are very essential to my Wagtail story. Like I cannot measure the impact of the help they rendered, but I can tell you for a fact that those efforts they made ended up with me being a contributor to the Wagtail CMS for Google Summer of Code twice. It allowed me also assist other contributors. It gave me a much needed confidence boost, and it gave me the morale to go on and contribute to Django itself, which is how I found myself as a Django nut. So, and by mind you, Django is the framework that Wagtail is built off of. So, receiving kindness is definitely, receiving help rather, is definitely a kindness that every contributor will forever be grateful for. So, sometimes even just helping out that person that wants to help is in itself a contribution to Wagtail because it cannot be stressed just how important it is to help people. At the end of the day, that's what the core of open source is all about, helping people. So, next steps, contribute. Join the community Slack, wagtail.org/Slack. Um, get started on something, talk to people within the community, just help out wherever you can. If it's a contribution, like a translation, if it's a pull request, if it's an issue, it's a feature request. If all you can do really is just look at stuff, then please do look at stuff, give your feedback, give your opinions, just contribute. It helps to make the community better. And in the 10 years since Wagtail's inception, this is how good it has been so far. Now, imagine all the good things that could come off having even more contributors helping out and looking out for the community. So, if you do want to reach me, you could reach me on LinkedIn at Chemizo Akujobi, or X, formerly known as Twitter, on CNE_TION. And I hope it wasn't so easy to tell, but this was my first ever talk. And thank you all for attending. I genuinely appreciate. Catch you next time.